Hello, everyone. A great good evening from Berlin. I would like to thank at first Yen for its today's invitation for the webinar and ActiveRainbow to make the suggestion to me to be representative of such a colorful and lovely organization and community as LGBT that I'm both member of them. Before I start the presentation, I will share some things about me and quite short story. I'm Lefkothea, I'm Greek female. My pronouns are she and her. I'm social worker, hopefully human rights defender, and I'm currently living in Berlin. Since I remember myself, I always been wondering for social problems, people, social policies. I was that kind of child and student and person that couldn't tolerate the injustice and harmful behaviors. So I was also a child that and a student who defends other people in school, and I was that little girl who used to sit improperly in classrooms in chairs, improperly for my teachers because I was told all the time that the girls do not sit like that or do not speak in this way, or they don't have to defend other people. So yeah, I was like a female version of Che Guevara for someone, but boys are boys. At the age of 8, I have been survival of catwalking and sexual harassment during my way back at home. So it was like an action that it was so motivated for me until now. My grandparents and my mom were immigrants in Germany as well during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I was raised hearing a lot from my siblings about immigrants, exclusion, rights, and policies. At the age of 18, I bought myself a present. It was a book from Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, and all these stereotype gender things and gender issues were buttoned together up. As international volunteer of ActiveRainbow, I would like to share with you some first information about the organization, and after that, in the upcoming sections, we will discuss together the gender and sexual minority LGBTQI+, the discrimination that the minority faces and what we can do and should do as organization and as individuals for raising awareness, enhancing the visibility of minorities. So ActiveRainbow is an organization that works mostly with LGBTQA+ youth, which is based in Greece. It was actually the first organization which work with LGBT people in Greece and youth and Erasmus programs. The platform was founded in 2014, at first as a self-organized initiative, but it has experienced the last 6 years with a lot of programs, youth exchanges in local, European, international level. Since March 2020, it was the first branch of the organization was established in Latvia. And in our contribution, it's the creation of a world where diversity is welcome and celebrated as a value, while the mission of the organization is the commitment to strengthen the implementation of human rights and enhance the quality of LGBT spectrum education by offering learning opportunities for people to grow and thrive. As international volunteer of the organization and participant in programs, I can assure that ActiveRainbow is that organization that builds a safe space for everyone to feel free and express themselves. And somehow we all together build a family. You feel like you're discovering and building a new family where you all together decide for your own family values and rules. As I mentioned before, together we will discover the LGBT community. A minority cannot exist on its own, but based on some prejudices, as many things are widely mentioned. Probably you will listen some of them about LGBTs. That's, for example, that homosexuality is a trend or non-binary people a trend. It's like a propaganda or something. But in reality, homosexuality and non-binary people is a fact of nature observed in every human society throughout the history, but now it's more political issue, maybe. The second prejudice is that HIV is mostly related to LGBTQA plus people. HIV, it's a virus, it's something that's caused by a virus. It can spread throughout sexual contact or blood, during breastfeeding or from a mother to a child during pregnancy. Any sexual network in which people have multiple and concurrent sex partners is especially conducted for the spread of HIV, not only gay men or trans people. Next is that widespread belief that bisexual people are confused with the sexual orientation. They don't know if they are gay or lesbian, for example, or they don't have discovered yet. According to the Safe Zone Manual, bisexuality is a legitimate sexual orientation, while some people go through a transitional period of bisexuality as part of exploring their homosexual identity. There are bisexual people that they use this transitional phase in their coming out as bisexuals. And have in your mind that bisexual feel more safe and protected when the environment is also friendly to them and it's not like weird for them coming out as bisexuals. The reason of being an LGBT person is based on specific factors. According to the American Psychological Association, there is no consensus among scientists that differ sexual orientation based on very specific factors. Last but not least, why be proud of your sexuality or gender expression? Why does Pride take place? Pride events are annual demonstrations that take place around the world every year. History is hidden behind it. If you want to find out more, you can search for Stonewall's riots. The first Pride took place at 1970 against the police brutality in New York streets 1 year ago. It is very important to pinpoint the power behind the prejudices. Prejudices affect the way we feel about people, and this is closely related with our behaviors, with our harmful behaviors, leading to discrimination. And talking about discrimination and LGBT community, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, genderism, hate speech, even if hate crimes are some keywords. These discrimination types can cause to harm behavior to people that are members of the community, and also can take place in work, in school, and in social situations. There are a lot of research on the internet, if you want to search, that children face bullying and discrimination or expulsion from schools because of their gender expression or for their sexuality. Also, LGBT communities and minorities, one of the few minorities that they face rejection sometimes against by their family experience. It is very important to mention that ActiveRainbow work with youth that they experience family rejection, that they are rejected by their families or they live with abusive families. We have noticed the abusive condition for legal gender recognition for trans people. In many countries, transgender and neutral gender is not recognized yet, and trans people always face problems according to their treatment in public health systems as well. Queer people have fewer possibilities being hired than straight people, And one more thing for the social scientists as well, and for the human rights defenders, is that we have noticed the exclusion of LGBTQA plus people from the design implementation of laws and policies. Of course, LGBT people and minorities do not face only micro level discrimination, but also the macro level, which is called structural discrimination. When we speak about structural discrimination, we mention some norms and some rules, let's say, that they are more deeper in the system where the people used to live. Characteristic example is the failure and the denial of public health systems all over the world to account the different health needs of LGBT people, and especially for trans people. And talking about Greece, people who have sexual active life since 1977, homosexual, of course, are excluded from donating blood, even if they use protection during their sexual acts, and despite the huge need we have now due to COVID-19 pandemic. Identifying the different types of discrimination what a marginalized group face is the first step in order to act. That means that from the point that we name some discrimination acts, we reveal them and we are ready to act. So both as organization and as individuals, we already use, or we can use, many more tools and mechanisms in order to combat discriminatory and abusive acts. First of all, as our objective is activism, ActiveRainbow does activism through non-formal educational programs, workshops, or social media campaigns. On the other hand, as individuals, we should be aware of minorities, be active, supporting massive actions concerning human rights and dignity, enhancing inclusive legally binding policies. We try to use inclusive language and pronouns as much as possible, as we want to respect the right of self-determination. A main mechanism that ActiveRainbow already use, but we as individuals and some social workers here could also be aware, is to address the LGBT people needs, hear them and give the bottom to the community itself in order to plan and design policies, programs, workshop, services. We work for people with the people. Also, that is for ActiveRainbow as well, but for us as individuals, that our action is not one-sided, but in the intersectional network and cooperation with LGBT organization and non is very important, plays a major role. As LGBT individuals, it is helpful for us to find LGBT supporter, local, national, international, because as an LGBT member, I can assure that protection and safety, it's very, very important. Last but not least, something that can be adopted both by organization and from us, it's raising awareness about the law system, policies, and organization regarding exclusion and discrimination. What a person can do in case that find itself under racist actions, or it's survival from gender-based violence. It is very important for people to know where they can where they can find help. All these tools and mechanisms are already used by ActiveRainbow and are offered for everyone who is interested on taking action with LGBT people community. Talking about minorities, independently if we talk about LGBT or about an ethnic minority or low-income minority, oppression, discrimination, and inequality are focal points. Minority groups are forced to face inequality, oppression systematically, deprivation of human rights, and human rights violence due to social structures, policies, and laws. Grounded on common points, we can share some good practices applicable to other minorities. It is very important to not forget that individual does not consist only of one identity. For example, being gay, but for other identities as well that is come in and through relationship to each other. For example, being gay, being seeking asylum in a European country. There are multiple identities that are intervened. So this is called intersectionality as well. So if we want to discuss some good practices altogether, some could be that building an inclusive and safe environment with respect to all minorities' needs. We should also understand that minority have very specific needs and abusive vocabulary abusive regarding our community. Ask people how they are determining themselves and respect the right to self-determination. We can adapt activities aimed to empower people and use the sentiment of feeling guilty about being a minority and give them perspective of the structural analysis of personal problems. And last but not least, grounded on intersectionality and multiple identities, we can build a network with social movements, defending fundamental human rights, and take action for minorities. It's a great of importance. And in our mission is to establish more intersectional policies for all of us. Finally, before you leave the webinar today, please take 2 minutes to think about the comments sometimes probably you do when you harm people, and try to be as much inclusive as you can. And I would like to close this webinar through a phrase that everyone should be able to feel free and proud of who really are and who they love. Occasioned by Human Rights Day, that's today, I would mention the Article 19 of the Human Rights Declaration, which protects everyone's rights to express themselves freely. You will find attached some PDF or some links in the comments, in the chat, sorry. So feel free if you want to explore more or to ask something, you can do that. Thank you so much for your visits.
Thank you, Lefkothea, for the wonderful presentation. So it was personally amazing. I hope that everybody else enjoyed it. And for now, I will open the floor for the Q&A, which will be about 10 minutes. So if any one of you has any questions, you can ask and we will provide them.
I noticed that I did a lot of during the presentation. I'm sorry about that. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so we already have one question, Jihan. So what is the Safe Zone Manual? Is it a document that all individuals can use?
Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, Safe Zone Manual, it's established by Antioch University, which is said about LGBT community and minority as a gender and sexual minority. So it's a huge one. You can search there some good things in order to make a more inclusive environment for people, or to see the myths and that are behind LGBT people. It's mainly for this kind of minority, but it has also some intersectional parts that are useful for every minority and for every organization. So feel free to discover it. It's very nice and it's very useful.
Okay, so we have another one from Eva. So for a youth organization that is not specifically dealing with this topic, what can we do to be more inclusive for LGBT youth? Do you have any practical advice?
Thank you. The first thing that I could say is the inclusive language. A language is something that we protect people when with the pronouns when we name someone, a person. It can be very harmful for anyone. So the first thing, the pronouns and the inclusive language first, and second is to build a space that is very safe. That means that has all the human rights on core and respect self-determination and diversity, and try to be as much careful as we can with any part of the identities.
So guys, don't be shy. Feel free to ask any question that you're interested about. So the floor is still open.
Sorry, I would like to mention also it's that when this is for organization, for individuals, for everyone. It is very important to take into consideration the LGBT people and the community because they can share their stories and their life. So depending on their experience or their living experience, specifically, we can do things and be as much as inclusive more than we ever thought because we rely on these people and we give the baton to them. This was for the previous question as well.
Okay, so we have two more things. So first, I'm gonna read this interesting comment. So the Declaration of Human Rights. So we have today is the 72nd year since it was proclaimed by the United Nations. So this is a very interesting fact to keep in mind. And then we have a question. Let me just read it out. So, oops. So the same question as before. So, but what can we do as individuals? So the answer was about an organization, but what could we do as individuals?
Mm-hmm. As individuals, we can search for many information and about things for every minority. We can search for some organization, try to find some networks at university, for example, or at your neighborhood. So in this kind of area, you can feel more free and you can meet people there throughout the networking and other organization. Also, individuals have, I think, to educate themselves and find some things or try to think about the prejudices if you have already or what you can do to combat them um, and be as much supported as you can. So networking for sure, groups, and trying to come closer to LGBT youth.
Right. We have a question from Kasia. So you mentioned Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correct.
Yeah.
Is there any other book or movie that you can recommend that really moved or resonated with you?
For me, of course, it was Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, Angela Davis about the Black feminist. And if you want to find out more for LGBT community, there are a lot of books and a lot of films. For me, one of the most impactful is the Blue is the Warmest Color. and pose, which is also intersectional. About books, I know Orlando as well, but from my books, I will totally recommend Second Sex, of course, and Angela Davis, Black Feminist.
Right. And then we have another question coming from Bora. So very interesting. Thank you for the presentation. So this is just what was written down. So the opinion here is that people that are against the LGBTQI plus community should be better educated. So have you ever contacted the Ministry of Education to do something about this?
I would like to ask Bora if she means for Latvia or for Greece, because it's something different. And we can, of course. Okay, good. For Greece, as ActiveRainbow, as I already know, I don't think that we have, we don't have contact with the Ministry of Education. But me, as representative and also as founding member of an initiative group in my university, we tried, but we didn't have something to do with. We didn't have a feedback from them. I know that from the Ministry of Education, they, in Greece at least, many things try to be happen, but no, because we have this religious thing in Greece. So a lot of books, for example, that have already written for sexual orientation and for LGBT community are rejected by the Minister of Education due to religion stuff and power of our church. So no. So for this year, we try to focus more on non-formal education. It will be great if the Ministry of Education will be more open to these kind of actions. And it's an open call for anyone who wants to join, and we can do something, or we can just recommend something as ActiveRainbow, I think. Kathy.
All right. Okay, so seeing as there are no more questions and the 10 minutes are more or less off, I would suggest that we proceed with the next organization and when the next person presenting. So I would kindly ask Helena Lupinc from DM Plus to start with her presentation.
Thank you very much, Angelo. And yeah, hello and welcome everyone. I'm quite excited to be here. For myself as an individual, because I'm passionate about minorities, but also for the organization I'm part of, so DM Plus, because we are a new organization, and we're also a new member organization of FIEN. So this is very exciting for all of us to be here today and being able to have a conversation with all of you. So before starting talking about my own minorities, so the Slovenes in Italy, I'd just like to mention a few things about minorities in general. And because it is a topic quite close to me, not just because, as I mentioned before, I'm part of a minority myself, but also because I'm just generally passionate about diversity and minorities as such. So I think it is quite a quite general perspective of people when they think about minorities, that they have in mind the typical image, for example, of a state and having differences within that state, which is the most easiest way of kind of thinking about minorities. So the old idea of the nation state, so having a state with one nation in it, and the state being homogeneous with its nation, it's quite an old idea nowadays with globalization processes going on, migration, and all kinds of diversity that's going on. It's impossible, and it is an old idea. So having this homogeneous idea of the nation state. When we evaluate minorities, we might think of them in two ways. So in one way, we might think of them as in terms of numbers. So if you have a group which is smaller than another group, then you might define that group as a minority. On the other hand, minorities are also defined in terms of discrimination, groups that don't enjoy the same rights as other groups do, and also in terms of being underrepresented. And this is kind of a widespread concept, And it also shows on how minorities are really widespread and how many different perspectives we might have on the one concept of minorities. And this is something that is also, we are also showing here today, because I am here representing an ethnic minority, so Slovenes in Italy. And then we have another group representing a minority which is not an ethnic minority, which was not formed, or we should say, or came into existence because of historical reasons, because of wars going on, because of treaties and pacts and so on and so forth. And it kind of shows on how, on the mosaic that minorities are, and on how widespread they are and how easy it is to actually find a minority. And it's really nice to be here and being able for all of us to show and to share two different types of minorities. And to make sure on how minorities are actually a majority after all. This is something that I really like saying, because if you think about it, it is true. Like nowadays there are differences everywhere, and it's really difficult to find a homogeneous thing that you could say, okay, this is a majority and this is just purely what it is. And minorities are found everywhere. Differences are everywhere. Society changes. It is dynamic, and it's really nice to think of how rich a society can be if it is full of minorities and full of differences. Another thing that I just quickly want to mention, this is something really personal to me, is the concept of minority as such. I've been quite, we could say, critical towards this concept, and this is something that I would really like to know your opinion on this, perhaps in the chat box or in the comments later, because the term minority has some kind of a negative connotation, you could say, because for a minority to exist, there must be a majority, because a minority on itself cannot be a minority. You know what I mean? Like for a minority, you need to have a bigger group upon which a minority can differentiate. Therefore, there's always this consistent idea of a minority being something in relation to something else, as if a minority could not stand on its own. And this is the misconception that kind of we also give ourselves by calling ourselves a minority, you know, that we also accept the fact that without a majority, we wouldn't be here. And this is why I tend to encourage people, but just, you know, if you want to use it, use it. If you don't, then don't. I mean, it's as easy as this. But personally, I've really been trying to use the term community instead of minority. For example, if you should say the Slovenian minority in Italy, why don't you use the Slovenian community in Italy? Because it seems like we are a third category. We are something small and an underrepresented group within Italy. But after all, we are just Slovenians. You know, we're just the same people as Slovenians are in the Republic of Slovenia. It just happened, you know, for us to be in Italy, but we're just one whole thing. So this is really a short thing that I wanted to mention, and I'm really interested in knowing what you think about this and to have a discussion upon this, because it's a really widespread term that people use. And if you have any other options, if you agree with it, then I'll be happy to know. So now I'm really getting into who we are, so Slovenes in Italy. For those who don't know us yet, I'll just give some basic information. So we are an autochthonous community, which means that we've always lived here in the territory in which we are now. We live in northeastern Italy, next to the border with Slovenia, as you might have guessed. And there's approximately 80,000 of us. We live in bilingual environments. We benefit from schooling in Slovenian language. We are free to have our Slovenian organizations, associations, and institutions. We can speak Slovenian in public domains. We can talk Slovenian to, for example, employers, and also expect from them to talk back to us in Slovenian. We are protected and supported by the jurisdiction of both the Italian and Slovenian republics and receive financial support from both. This is all really, really nice, but this is just the technical side of the whole thing. We do experience discrimination as well and I decided to portray the discrimination that we face in three subgroups mainly. So the first one regards language, the second one history, and the third one is the one that I decided to call the status quo. So about language, as much as we have the right to speak Slovenian, we still live in Italy, and most of the time Italians just don't know Slovenian or don't feel the need to speak Slovenian. After all, the general idea, you live in Italy and the official language is Italian, then let's speak Italian altogether. Therefore, Slovenian people oftentimes, because they are bilingual most of the time, they just shift to Italian because it's easier, it's easier to get understand. And this obviously does not help the language itself. Most of the people in the territory, in the bilingual territory in Italy, don't know that we exist. And when I refer to most people, I say Italians, they are kind of oblivious that we are there for some kind of reason. But this also relates to how history is portrayed, which is a kind of complex thing. And I would be happy to share with you some books or data if you're interested in knowing something more. And there's another group of people which, well, they know that we exist, but prefer to pretend that they don't know us. And in a sense that they not encourage us, but expect from us to assimilate and to kind of, what I mentioned before, you're in Italy, then speak Italian, what's the need? Yeah, so this is what it is for language. As a minority language, most of the time, you feel the pressure of the majority language upon that language. And I think this is a quite common feature for every minority. Then history. Well, as most of you might know, we've suffered quite a lot of discrimination during the fascist regime. We've been, our language forbidden. Everything was Italianized, our surnames, names, name of cities. We were forbidden to speak Slovenian in public places. The schools were shut, the books were burned. We were, well, considered not enough, what was typical for the fascist regime and for history in that time as well. And this is something that is really persistent in our community, at least among Slovenians in Italy and among Italians living there, because you still feel this kind of attitude from Italians themselves, because we still have loads of neo-fascist groups that still call us in many different ways. And still discriminate against us for the reasons and the things that happened years and years and years ago. And then the third discrimination that we face, which is the one I call status quo, is perhaps the biggest threat, which means that I'm not saying that the first one are not big reasons, and obviously there are clearly huge, important discriminations that we face. But the third one is especially threatening because it kind of comes from ourselves in a way that, as a minority, which is also understandable, if you've suffered in the past, you have the tendency to close yourself and to kind of, enjoy the status quo that you have. You're afraid of accepting new things, you're afraid of going too far or just to develop, because, you live in your closed bubble and you're safe where you are. But this, on the other hand, as a society evolves, you, as part of that society, in order to survive, you just have to evolve with it. You just have to, be part and just play along. And this is something that shows also among the generations, because you have the older generations within our community that prefer the status quo. And then you obviously have the youth and young people who are dynamic and who are full of energy, and they are just full of curiosity and just want to bring some new things to that society. They're just not afraid of God knows what, but they just want to go with it and just to take the plunge and kind of develop that society a bit more. They have the courage and they have the passion to do something with it. And most of the time they don't feel and they don't have the opportunity to kind of express themselves. And on the basis of this, our organization was formed, so the DM+, which stands for, in Slovenian, it is Društvo mladih Slovencev v Italiji, which is basically an organization of the Slovenian youth in Italy. We dedicate our time to young Slovenians living in Italy by bringing them together and giving them the necessary tools to work in order to achieve, to work for a better community overall. So by acquiring appropriate linguistic skills, teamwork, skills for guiding an organization, organizing events, etc. So you kind of bring together the youth in order to kind of give them the tools and to let them know that, you know, these can be better in a way. Because if you want to achieve something, the status quo doesn't help. You just wait to your death, or so to say. You just wait for something to happen from outside. Something that I forgot to mention before, which always stands under the status quo that I was talking about, is the fact that although we are Slovenians and we are part of part of the Slovenian nation, is the fact that there has been, by being minoritized, by being Slovenians in Italy, there is a third identity that is arising, and it has done so in the previous years as well, which is that of a third identity. So we are not Slovenians, we are not Italians, but we are something in between. And this is also seen in the way that there is not lots of collaboration and not lots of connection between Slovenes from Italy and Slovenians from Slovenia. It is quite separate, and it is a shame, it is a pity, you know, that you don't connect. But most of Slovenian people in Italy just accept the fact that we are separate, and they perhaps also don't feel the need to kind of connect with Slovenes from Slovenia. And I think it is quite necessary for us to accept and understand the fact that we are not merely a minority, but rather we are part of the Slovenian nation as a whole. You know, we're just Slovenians. We're not a Slovenian minority, but we're Slovenians as it is. Because I guess, you know, the future can be really harsh for a minority who is afraid of moving forward, so to say. And we as an organization really want to empower the young people not to be afraid of just taking their stance and just, you know, proving and making these relations also on an international scale. So us being here with you today and just trying to go forward. And this is also the way that we try to combat against these discriminations that we face, we as a youth organization. You were like, part of the plan was also to provide you with some movies and books that might kind of make the understanding easier of what our community is like. So we, with the organization, we're kind of looking at what we could present here today. And most of the things, I must say, were from the past. So historical documents, historical movies, books written by older generation writers, which also still encourages what I was talking previously about being tied to that history, which doesn't allow you to, you know, to develop. But we eventually managed to find, to find a movie which was done by, I'll try to share the screen, which is this one. It was done by a student who studied, I think he's finished studying now, but he studied film at the University of Ljubljana, and this is a movie made by him where it's called Bordered. You can check it out, and he is made by Leo Černic. If you want, I can paste the link in the chat box later on. And it basically kind of portrays in a really nice way our community in Italy. Right, I think this is it from me. I hope I was clear, and if not, please take your 10 minutes now to ask me further questions. And yeah, I'll just post this picture first. I'll share the screen so you can see who we actually are, just to see some faces. So this is our organization. There is more of us now. We've gained more people and we are growing, and this is really, really nice. And yeah, and we are happy for you if you'd like to get in touch with us and you would like to get to know something more about us. So yeah, this is it. And Angelo, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Helena, for the wonderful speech. So I also want to say good job on the timekeeping. So that was exactly 15 minutes. So
really?
yeah, very well done for that. So very impressive time management skills there. And yes, I will open the floor again. So 10 minutes for questions and answers as well. So feel free to type in the chat whatever you're interested in. Okay, so we have an immediate question from Chihan. How did or does Italy deal with its fascist heritage? Is there a part in the formal education about dealing with this heritage, and how does it affect the minorities in Italy today?
Wow, thank you for the question. Well, there are two ways, you know. On the one hand, you have people who face it in a way that you just no. People say there is a generally known fact that history is written by the ones who win, or something like this, by the winners. And this is also seen when it comes to education as well. You know, it is very structured and divided. Most of the time, you talk about the fascist regime in terms of as it is, you know, what the fascist regime was, but you don't, I'm talking about, for example, the educational system in Italian schools. And most of the time, the facts of how we dealt with minorities and the fact that the minority is still now present, it's left out most of the time. Whereas on the other hand, if you look at, because we have, you know, we have Slovenian schools and they are monolingual schools, we speak Slovenian, but we obviously learn about the history of our territory and about our language and also about Italy as it is, because we still live in Italy. And there is quite a lot of focus on what the fascist regime was and how it affected us. But we could arguably say that there is no such engagement from the other side, which also results in the fact that people are not aware of what it was and what effect it has today. And it obviously undermines the power that it had and the effects and the results that came of it. I think also the fact, you know, we live there together. It's a kind of it's a quite multicultural space, Trieste, the city we live in. But you know, and the fact that if you are neighbors with another country, but if you also have people from the neighboring country living in that city, I think it is. I'm not saying there is a need, but it is nice to just, you know, be friends with each other in a way that also you might, you know, try to engage yourself in a dialogue with the other side. Whereas in Italy, you can clearly feel the wall and the division between these two sides, which I guess, and I quite safely say that it is also part of what you mentioned, you know, the past, so the fascist heritage that we have. If you're asking that it's part of the formal education, well, obviously it is tackled, but in relation to minorities, I think it could be more. Like in my personal view, also consider our local past, we could deal with this definitely more.
Okay. Okay, we have another question coming from Mura. So again, thank you so much for the new information. Regarding the fact that Italians cannot see you as an Italian and Slovenians cannot see you as a Slovenian. Did this have an impact on your identity? And have you ever felt that you don't belong somewhere?
This is a really good question because I'm going through that phase right now, to be honest. Definitely, because you find yourself in a strange situation because you live in Italy, but you don't speak Italian. You know, you just meet together with certain groups which are separate from other Italian groups. You have friends who are not Italian friends. You might have, we do have Italian friends, of course. It's not that sad altogether, but you know, the community is still closed, and you kind of feel that there's something weird, I must say. Not weird, but you feel that it's not, you know, there's something different. Obviously, it's a really subjective matter. People might experience it in different ways. Most of the time, I guess that people also accept the fact that they are part of the minority, and they don't even pose themselves the question of what they are. They're just like, you know, it seems obvious to them, for them, you know, they're born in that specific community, and that's what it is. You know, it is what it is. They don't even question themselves on what they are. But on the other hand, you have people that yeah, they really struggle. You know, when I'm in Italy, most of the time people kind of, I'm not saying judge me, but they always look, when people speak like Slovenian, proper Slovenian, and when I say proper Slovenian, I mean not a dialect. You always look at weirdly, you know, wow, you speak Slovenian, as if, well, the dialects we speak are not Slovenian, you know. You're always looked at in a strange way. But when you go to the other side, when you go to Slovenia, people are like, oh, you're the Italian one. And you're like, well, you know, I'm the same as you, I'm Slovenian as well. And it also depends on you, on the character that you have, and the effect that it has on you. As I mentioned before, I feel Slovenian. I don't feel part of the Slovenian minority, but just because I don't want to, it's a minority. What does that mean? You know, it is a community. We are Slovenians. So I wouldn't define myself any different. I wouldn't define myself as a bordered person. Not a Slovenian, not a minoritized Slovenian, but as a Slovenian, as people in Slovenia identify themselves. Yeah, but this is a really nice question.
Right. Okay, we have something Martina wrote. I would say the situation is a little comparable to the situation of bisexual people facing biphobia, both inside the LGBT plus community and outside within the majority. Yeah, it's very understandable. If anybody else wants to say anything or just ask, feel free to use the chat box. We still have a few minutes left.
Is there anyone who wants to argue against what I said about the term minority? Or if anyone agrees or is against or has anything, that's nice. Because, you know, if we call ourselves, I'm always talking about minority because I have experience with it. If we call ourselves a minority, then we automatically kind of accept the fact that we are, you know, underrepresented and some kind of way always something less than the majority. So we kind of do harm to ourselves, like, you know, we just keep beating us on the back, you know. So it is quite a funny concept. I agree also with the fact that it's really difficult to find another term that would kind of, instead the term minority, that would have the same implications. But as I mentioned before, I'm good with the term community, which, yeah, in practice is a more inclusive language. Yeah.
Okay, then if nobody else is brave enough to argue with Helena, I think that sorry, yeah.
No, maybe I would add that this is more an issue of the Slovenes in Italy, that we call ourselves minority, because, for example, the LGBT community in Ljubljana or also in Trst, they also refer to itself as community, not minority. So this is more like our problem. We tend to call ourselves minority, which is, yeah, like,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, and also another thing, if I can add, I think that the problem in Italy is that Italy, in fact, did not deal with the fascism. So the problem is, like, the difference between Germany and Italy are those, and I think that's a problem. That was this after the war, there was this myth of the good Italian, and he did anything, and all was like German fault. But it was not like this. The ideas and the ideology was here in Italy, you know, and the anti-Slavism in the 20s was born here. So not dealing with this, it's the problem. And it's a problem also today, because also schools are not dealing with this, and they don't know that minorities exist and so on. And so that's the problem, I think, not dealing with history.
It's really frustrating. I agree with that, what you said, Esther. Thank you. And it's really frustrating you know, talking to people from Trieste, for example, that don't know that Slovenians exist there, and they don't know that there are Slovenian schools and all the rights that we have there. And it's really frustrating because you expect this to be, you could say, a dialogue between, why does it have to be that hard? You know, after all, you're just, the past is the past, let us just move forward, you know. Let Trieste be the multicultural city that it can be, you know, just, yeah, it's really frustrating sometimes, yeah.
All right, and there is one last question that I noticed here from Lefkothea. So it is known that Italy since 2015 has received a huge wave of asylum seekers. I would like to ask, did this affect, and if it affected, the attitude of the Italians towards the Slovenians?
It's quite specific. I don't think that it affected the attitude towards us Slovenians in any different way. It also reflects the government that we have, which is, you know, against, you know, immigration, and which supports and promotes a united Italy, so Italians first, and this kind of thing. So by having some misconceptions against you know, asylum seekers, I guess it doesn't change the attitude towards us. You know, they are as a minority just as much as we are. So I think they're just, you know, not aware of the fact that yeah, I think it hasn't affected in any different way. I mean, it might be a bit extreme to say that it has not affected the attitude towards Slovenians because they simply don't know that we exist. This might be a bit extreme, but you know, it would be nice to ask a representative, a politician, what do they think about, you know, Slovenians in Italy and about what they do. Probably now it's been talked a bit about more because of everything that's been going on with the Narodni Dom that we've, you know, that we have, and it's been talked about quite a lot lately. But after all, I think that this is just a general stance of Italians, that they just are oblivious of the diversity that we have. And to answer your question, I think it hasn't affected it in any different way, and yeah, at least we don't see any difference, you know. Yeah. And if anyone else from our community wants to add to this, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that what is sad to me, it's that also within our minority, not like everyone is really open to asylum seekers. So, because at the end, we as a minority, I mean, we are still people, many different people. So also inside our community, there is, yeah, some, how would you say, not rejection, but yeah, hate towards asylum seekers. And on the other hand, this wave of asylum seekers in some way, I would say, affected the attitude of the Italians towards the Slovenians almost in a positive way, in the sense that Italians now, like, they see us, we are still more, how would you say, living in the same geographical location. So we have more rights to be there than asylum seekers. That's what, I don't know if I explain myself, but like, it's this paradox of, like, they accept us more because asylum seekers are more I don't find the word. More, I don't know.
More outsiders than
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Outsiders than us. Thank you, Helena.
This is what I thought, because quite the same it's in Greece as well, with the people who came from Albania and asylum seekers and refugees or immigrants. It is, yeah, it has affected in a, let's say, positive way, at least what's shown in social media and in some conversation with other people. Thank you.
Okay, if there isn't anybody else who would like to add anything, I would propose that we move to the conclusion and a wrap up of this Thursday evening webinar. So yes, we had two fantastic, I would say, presentations, a presentation and a speech, I would say, both very good. I would like to thank both Lefkothea and Helena for their participation, for the presentation. And yeah, if you could give a warm applause like that. Yeah, in general, we discussed more or less the objectives. So about discrimination, prejudice, what people from different backgrounds are facing, and what are some things that we can do in order to change things. So because we know that once somebody's from a different background, he will most likely be viewed differently by other people, and we all as individuals, not only as organizations, could take some steps or some actions to prevent this, to change this, so to make sure that everybody feels the same as everybody else, and that also we're not different from the others in any way possible. Yeah, we might be from a different place, but at the end of the day, we all people living on the same earth. So with that, I would like to conclude this first webinar of the Digital Autumn webinars. And now I would like to mention that we will have a group photo or a group screenshot. So whoever doesn't feel comfortable having their camera turned on, you can simply turn them off. No worries, no hard feelings there. And yeah, I will kindly ask you to put up your brightest smiles for this fantastic evening. Yeah. I have to check if the picture has been taken. Just a second. Okay, good. We have the picture. Then thank you once again, everyone, for attending the webinar. I hope you all enjoyed it. And yeah, I really hope to see you all soon. Thank you from my side. Take care.
Sorry, I'm trying to manage this, but it does not work.